couple of minutes here, 1 or 2 minutes, just as people come in, and then we'll start there. Awesome. I see we have more people joining in. Just giving a few more minutes for more people to join in, and then we'll be starting soon. Cool, cool. As people join in, just giving one more minute here real quick before we get started. Cool, cool. So I think we got a lot of people here now, and I'm gonna get started in like a few seconds here, just to allow for any final stragglers there, and then we'll dive into. Cool, cool. All right, so welcome everybody. My name is Pedro Sosa, and today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about going beyond the annual pen test and really rethinking the pen testing program. So to give you a little bit of background, I'm one of the directors of security services here at Novacoast, but I've been working with the pen testing team here at Novacoast for a little under a decade. So during that time, as you can imagine, we've seen a lot of trends come and go, and we've seen a lot of trends come and go. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're going to be like, what we're seeing now, and how I believe this is changing, how pen testing is changing as we look ahead and into the future, um, and the future, the very near future, I would say. So to get us started, let's start with a baseline of where we are now, right? So where we are now. So in terms of the current state of pen testing, so most organizations are running annual pen tests. Maybe some of them are running biannually, focusing on external, internal. Maybe some are adding a little extra, focusing on their web applications that they're developing, or focusing on like phishing, et cetera, right? And this is fantastic. It helps meet obviously compliance requirements, whether you have to deal with like PCI or HIPAA or whatever it is that you need there, or if it's a cybersecurity insurance requirement, and it's fantastic for providing an understanding of like what can an attacker do if they started targeting your organization right there and then, right? How are they going to progress? From like an internal perspective all the way to domain admin, or from an external perspective breaking into your internal assets or whatever it is that you're scoping out, right? The big problem with it is that it's a limited point in time, right? So you have that key understanding when you did it, but then if you're waiting a full year, obviously, like in a year, so many things could be changing, and so you don't have that constant evolutionary sort of perspective of how you're doing at any given point in time. So I know that it's very cliche to say that the threat landscape is changing, because I feel like that's what you hear in almost all webinars. But I wanted to dive a little bit into the numbers and show you what I mean when I say that the threat landscape is changing, right? And so obviously, this change in landscape is forcing us to also rethink how we're doing pen testing into a more offensive program, right? So why we need to evolve. So if we're looking at uniquely infrastructure, we are looking at, let's take a look at CVEs, right? So purely on CVE growth, we used to be at 79 CVEs were being published a day in 2023. Then they bumped up to 108 a day in 2024. And then if we just look at the first half of 2025, we're talking 131. And it's looking like by the end of 2025, that number is going to be much higher. So you might say, well, Pedro, that's all fine and dandy, but like not all CVEs have exploits, not all have proof of concepts, right? Well, it's generally understood, or it's generally estimated that that 30% of CVEs have some proof of concept associated with them, right? So obviously, if that number is increasing, you also are saying that there's more CVEs with proof of concept. And that number, by the way they estimated this in the study, is kind of like a rolling window. So that number might be changing, like in the years to come, or it might even be changing in 2025, right? But let's be conservative and say that that number is staying the same and it's just 30%. Well, something that is changing very dramatically is the weaponization speed. So by this, I mean, when you have a CVE, how fast is it going from just a theoretical CVE all the way to like a proof of concept, right? Or like an exploitation, like an exploitable CVE. And that weaponization speed dropped from 32 days in 2024 to 5 days in 2025. So if you think about that, that's an insane drop. That's saying that before, theoretically, right, you had like a CVE came out and you had about a month to like patch it and like fix it before the POC came out and the exploits came out. Now you're talking about less than like literally a work week, 5 days, right? And that's an average. So like if you look uh, at the exploits that are, sorry, 28% of exploits end up being exploited within 1 day of disclosure. These are CVEs with POCs, right? Um, so we're looking at an incredibly aggressive like landscape that is weaponizing a lot of CVs that are coming out, in such a speed that you have to like we have to start thinking and changing how we think about just security in general, right? Not just in the realm of pen testing, but in all realms. Like, how are we going to make sure that we keep up with this pace? Now, obviously, I've been looking through a lot of different like articles and studies, and there's like there's no direct link, but it's very obvious what's happening is AI, right? Like AI is what changed from 2024 2025, and this last few years. We're seeing AI being used to code a ton of proof of concepts, a ton of like malware and ransomware and things like that. And so um, it's really assisting in this revolution of like, all right, we're going to have, as we move further and further along, we're going to have these pipelines of like a CVE is going to come out, and then you're going to have a proof of concept associated with it. I was recently at DEF CON a couple of weeks back, and it's kind of fascinating. Obviously, like like you'll hear a lot of vendors that are trying to do stuff in this field, or you'll hear a lot of like research or organizations, but just in general, like purely looking at like just open source, in the realm of open source, everybody's like looking into this area of like, all right, how are we going to make exploitation, faster? Essentially, how are we going to build POCs based on CVEs? How are we going to find like vulnerabilities faster? It's just this race um, on both ends. It's the race on the offensive end and the race on the defensive end. So now, obviously, if we compare that to like patching in general, these numbers haven't changed too much through the years, but essentially like 77% of organizations generally take longer than 1 week to patch. And the average patching time, depending on like the studies that you're looking at, range between 97 to 102 days. So you're talking about, 3-4 months to do that. So obviously there's a huge discrepancy between these two, like the attacking team, the defensive team. We're trying to bridge that gap as much as possible, right? And give the defenders as much information as possible to be able to keep up with this uh, uh, weaponization, that we're seeing. Now, if you're looking at this and saying like, all right, that's all nice and dandy, but I actually am, I'm an organization that's very infrastructure lean, and I really just focus on developing applications, or, that's more my realm. I also wanted to have some numbers for those folks. So if we're looking at web apps, and these are like very like short sort of pieces here, but for the web applications from like we're still seeing a lot of the typical errors very rampant across web applications. If you look at like a very telling thing is the fact that OWASP top 10 lists injection attacks as number 3, and it has been at number 3 for a long time, right? It has been within the top 3 for a long time, which is, these are like SQL injections and cross-site scripting and template injection and things of that nature, right? These are things that should be easily caught. You don't need a pen test to be able to like to find those. You should be able to catch those more easily, even before the pen test comes around, right? The pen test should be for the more complicated sort of like business logic errors and like very convoluted like things that you need more creativity for. If you look at like vulnerable dependencies, I mean, this is something that we all kind of know because we are building stacks on open source software, and like open source software is there's always this race of like, all right, how do I keep my dependencies like up to date without breaking stuff? But like at the end of the day, you have 71% of apps are using some type of dependency that has vulnerabilities. And I thought this one was kind of interesting, just purely secrets committed to GitHub last year were about 23.8 million, which is insane. All of these errors are very typical, or things that you should be able to really quickly catch with a proper DevSecOps cycle, and something that you don't necessarily need a pen test can obviously like point all of those issues out, but a pen test should really be there for like the more complex errors that, that's where you want to use the creativity of humans to really understand like, all right, you have these bigger overarching issues, right? As a side note, sort of anecdotally, and I wanted to add this just because some people might be doing this kind of stuff already. We've been doing a lot of red teaming on AIs, like and LLMs. Mostly like, organizations that are already applying AI, whether it's like a chatbot to talk to your, help desk, or to talk to your clients or whatever, or if you're implementing it in like a more, in a more intertwined way with other systems. We have been looking at that more and more and finding like issues around that relating to, even if it's just a chatbot, just how they're being deployed, in terms of like prompt injection attacks and like protection of like API keys and abusing, like if they have integrations with other things. So I think this is a realm that there's still not a lot of still not a lot of a clear, concise pathways to how to make this secure, and so we're seeing a lot of insecurities pop up in this realm. So across all of these, at a high level, the other thing that we see a lot is like we'll turn in a report on year 1. We turn in the report, has different vulnerabilities like highs, criticals, whatever, and then we provide it to the customer. The customer goes off, we come back the next year and we look at doing the pen test, and we find the same issues that we found last year, but also a bunch of new issues because obviously there's a barrage of new stuff coming out every day. So as we look at that, we were realizing that the speed is not sustainable, and the idea is that we have to rethink how we think of penetration testing. So kind of shifting our mindset from a point in time test to more of having an offensive security program, which is something that some very, very large organizations have like on their own. Is just, like this idea of, okay, we're not just doing pen testing for the sake of pen testing. There's a sort of a program, an overarching program for the entire year with goals, and how this would look like is you end up having a virtual adversary lead. So that's going to be like your main advisor in terms of like anything pen testing related, which I don't know, could look something like this chief attack officer here, just saying. And then you would have, your annual holistic test, because you still got to do your pen test, but then in between those bigger pen tests, you can have monthly or quarterly attack sprints. And that monthly or quarterly, I just put that there to put like something. Realistically, you can set it up however cadence you want, right? Depending on like what it is that you're doing. And then the other key piece is ensuring that you are not just attacking for the sake of attacking and just producing results and more results and more results. Remediation has to be married to this. There has to be a clear partnership between like the pen testing and remediation and fixing these issues and then validating that those issues are fixed. So in our program, we have that remediation baked in with validation for for the issues found across the attack sprints and whatnot. The main goal, oh, so sorry. So this is kind of how it would look like if you think about it logistically, right? You have, I'm going to use the cursor here, you have your yearly pen test, and then you have your attack sprints with remediation assistance, where devs and engineers would come in, help you fix whatever issues they found and validate that those issues were fixed. Then you have your second sprint, so on and so forth. And I'll dive a little bit deeper into like a more concrete example as to what these sprints can look like, depending on what type of organization you are. But for now, just think of them as like shorter tests, right? And yeah, the goal continues to be the same. You want to measurably reduce risk and honestly keep up like and have less vulnerability depth, right? So this is just another way of visualizing this. I like having a lot of different diagrams to explain the concept, but pretty much the same idea is you still have your standard pen test that you're doing annually, biannually, whatever cadence you are doing so far. So just same tests for annual compliance, which informs your your priorities and key issues for the year. And then you have the continuous aspect of it, where you have your attack sprints, which are more quick tests. They're mainly focused on like what's exploitable. What can they? It's not as interested in like the small misconfigurations or anything. It's like literally what could be the key issues affecting you right now, right in this moment in time, in between the big pen tests. And then you have more red teaming consulting as well as remediation. Like the remediation part is very important, is inherent to this whole process that you're remediating, right? It's not just trying to give you more and more list of things that are wrong. It's more, let's fix the things as we had discovered. So how does this look in practice, right? Before I dive into how this is looking in practice, I want you to take a moment and kind of think about what your environment looks like. What are some of the key critical areas? Like you probably already know ahead of time, like, yeah, okay, we have obviously our core infrastructure where you might have some stuff in the cloud. Some of you might be fully in the cloud. Some might be developing web applications or have OT, SCADA, depending on what you're doing. And is there any key areas that you have not yet tested, right? Because maybe you do have, like maybe you have cloud, but you've been doing external, internal, not really testing the cloud configurations, or you do have internal, external, but some portions of the OT environment haven't been tested, So with that in mind, I'm going to walk you through 3 different scenarios, but I do want to point out that this is very much customizable. So if either of these, if you're looking through these scenarios and you're like, actually, like we're somewhere in between the 3, or we're like somewhere else, this is completely, customizable to any type of situation and any type of organization and environment. So for an infra heavy focus, so just focus on external, internal type situation. Your flash tests would still focus on the external, internal, just to make sure that you're keeping up with the threat landscape as new exploits come out. Or it can also be kind of like change-driven scope. So if you are some organizations that we've done, like we'll start the pen test, and then throughout the pen test, they'll tell us actually, in like about a month or so, this will go away or that will go away because we're actually changing blah 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 blah. So it's almost like we know we're doing a pen test that specific set of results or whatever relates to whatever change they're doing is like not even that important because it goes away in like a few weeks or something like that. And then the new piece is not getting tested until they wait for like the next year. So that kind of doesn't make sense. You want to make sure that you have something a little bit more reactive, that as you're changing and as you're growing, as you're adding different things, or modifying whatever it is that you're modifying within your internal environment, you have visibility, like these quick visibility checkups, like, all right, yeah, or am I doing good, or is this like incredibly exploitable? Like, what can I where am I, right? kind of went through this. So yeah, the cadence would be, still annual pen tests, but then you also have your monthly, quarterly sprints plus validation windows. And the main goal, sort of, yeah, like I just mentioned, is just continuously finding new exploitable issues, making sure that you're keeping up with that threat landscape, and then testing any significant changes. And then again, can't emphasize this enough, the validating the fixes, right? So like as you do these tests, we want to get you into this rhythm of like testing, testing, fixing, validating, and then testing again, and just kind of like cycling through that. Now, if you're more dev heavy focus, it changes it slightly, right? Because we're looking now at web applications, which tend to, move a little bit slower in terms of like, well, it depends, right? Like some organizations are adding new features constantly. Some organizations are going a little bit, are in a maintenance mode a little bit more. But either way, the way that we run this is we would set up you still have your yearly pen test that you're doing on your web application, but then your sprints might look a little bit different. So one of the things that we've been doing is more focusing on not only the application itself, but also how are you building stuff? Like we were talking about this, the DevSecOps process, right? Because there's a lot of issues. If we start encountering like SQL injections on your web pen test, there might be an issue with like the static analysis checks that you're doing prior to that, or if we're like exploiting vulnerabilities that come from dependencies, there's might be issues with like the software composition analysis that you're doing. So these might be like small things where it's like, oh, we just didn't realize that this is not properly, like we're not using the proper flags or whatever. We're not like actually testing this environment. Like we've seen that where it's like, oh, we're testing all the apps that we do, and then there's like this one module that's like not being tested for whatever reason. And it's like doesn't have to be like these crazy, errors. It's just that they kind of, if you're not like trying to test them and trying to look at it, you might miss them, and they kind of go unnoticed, right? Um, so for one of these, you would have your pen test, but then you could potentially have a DevSecOps assessment first thing, like a sprint. Essentially, you look at how it is that you're building stuff, how it is that it's configured, any gaps there. Then maybe on like Q2, you're releasing a new feature, so you want to do an assessment of that specific feature. Maybe later on in Q3, like you want to take a deeper look at the infrastructure that's holding the DevSec, the development environment, because that's another thing we see a lot where it's like development environments tend to be way messier than the rest of the organization, and the theory is that they're separated and segmented off from the rest of the environment. The practice is that that's rarely ever the case. Like those environments are like a breeding ground to like exploit there and then traverse out and go into like the internal side of the house. Like that's something that we see and do like all of the time. So definitely something worth looking at. And then maybe by Q4 you have another feature. We test the other feature, and so that kind of like moves you down the year in a very logical order, right? And in theory, like the next year when you do your yearly pen test, you're in a way better position because you've been fixing and remediating and like getting tighter and tighter, in your processes and your code. But yeah, main goals, again, just making sure that you're testing features as they release and not waiting a year for them, hardening the DevSecOps process and reducing recurring issues, right? You don't, because that's the other thing, like you maybe do a pen test, there's an SQL injection, you fix it, and then next year you do another pen test and there's another SQL issue. It's like, we don't want to see that, right? Like we want to see you getting to a position where it's like SQL issues are like you fix them once and they're not popping up again, because you have like good guardrails to prevent that kind of stuff from showing up, right? And I say SQL injections as an example, but it could be really anything, right? Like the more holistic approach, which we do with some organizations, is that tends to be good for like organizations that are very, very big and have a lot of presence all over the place. Like they literally have like cloud OT, like they want to do the phishing part. They have like web applications that they're developing. It's like they're all scattered across the entire realm. So it's a more custom scenario. You would still have whatever your yearly pen test requirements are. You still end up doing those, but then you also have your sprints. You're essentially focusing on different segments of the organization. So you might be focusing on external, internal the first time around. Then you might be focusing on cloud. for the next round, or social engineering for the next round, and then finally, like web apps and or whatever it is, right? And again, like if you're looking at this and you're saying like, I fit somewhere in the middle of these three, or like I have a completely separate thing, like it doesn't matter. Like it's customizable. The whole premise is to create a framework for you to think about pen testing as almost like a program that you're running to offensively test your security as you go, as opposed to just this one-time thing. Um, Sorry, I went kind of fast through that, but yeah, I kind of pointed all those out at this point. Like it's pretty much the same things that I just mentioned. So all right, so kind of like to wrap all of this up, the benefits of this continuous testing program. Again, you want to be proactive by design. So the idea is not to play catch up, but to really be ahead of the curve in terms of like where you're, you know, like you're preemptively testing and like understanding that there's new exploits coming out. There's new features that you're working on in your apps. There's new, you're actively making the security of your organization. You're actively attacking your organization uh, in in a safe manner to really prevent when a real attacker is coming to you. Like you're more secure in that way. Um, and obviously at the beginning you might be playing a little bit of catch up, but that's why you also have that remediation assistance to like help you boost that and move really fast through like these issues. Like we want you to like be uh, fixing misconfigurations and patching and doing all these things at a much more with more ease, so we can help you with that. The ongoing visibility component of it is important because, like as I mentioned, the threat landscape is rapidly changing, and we're just like at the very beginning of this. This is going to get like incredibly aggressive as the years go through, and so it's important to have that, to understand like where you are legitimately exploitable, because you obviously are going to be, you're still going to be doing your vulnerability scanning and things like that, but you're going to be getting a lot of like stuff where there's going to be a lot of CVEs that maybe it gets kind of hard to like really distinguish like where am I really exploitable? What can an attacker legitimately do in my environment at any given time? Right? So that's kind of what we're trying to do to help you out here. Um, Again, faster remediation validation. I think pen testing and remediation have to go hand in hand at this point in time. It's just a matter of, like the marriage between the things that we encounter and like the speed at which these are fixed within your environment, or at least like safeguards are put in there, or anything like that, needs to be within days, not months, because it's just the speed of weaponization is too fast. But yeah, and then this is sort of in the same vein. It's just a reduced risk over time, right? Like you're I think the key thing here to point out is for those developing, what we also want to help out with is like we do want to see fewer repeated findings. And I guess both on the infrastructure side, we definitely don't want to see the same type of finding popping up, but we also on the pen testing, the web application side, we really want to help you in like eradicating classes of findings, as opposed to saying like, oh, we fixed this SQL and this SQL. It's like, no, we fixed like SQLs is like something that's not going to keep showing up in like any of your apps. And then the cool thing about this, which we've noticed, is like the deeper you go into this, and the first couple of ones that you do, eventually you get to a point where like you're hardening so well that you can get really creative and really interesting in your testing. You can dive way deeper and try to abuse things that you're not spending time on like the easy things. You're really like doing like proper red teaming and coming up with really complicated chains of thoughts, of attacks. Sorry. But yeah, closing thoughts. Just if you take anything from this, I hope it's essentially just rethinking pen testing as a program, not just as an event that you're doing once a year, but like a year long type of program with like a clear, concise set of goals, and a reason as to why you're doing the tests that you're doing. Um, and then, yeah, building resiliency and testing throughout the year, as opposed to just, doing it once. and embedding and that marriage between pen testing and remediation, which I think is going to be critical. So yeah, if you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to drop them on the QA. I know we're at time, so we'll reach out afterwards. I'll reach out to you and we can like answer those questions and everything. But I hope you enjoyed the talk and you got something good out of it. So thank you, everybody.